like I said this to someone once. They said, "Oh, can I just double check? So you loved your job, people valued you and supported you. You had no job security issues. I didn't. And in my words, you got overpaid for what you did. All right." I'm like, and they're like, "So you're quitting that for nothing? Like for nothing certain?" I'm like, "Yeah, like, that's what I want to do." And it is scary, right? Like, and so I have to say that, when I've been wondering why I've struggled a bit to finish our first product. And I think it just comes down to there's a little bit of fear there going, oh, like I was successful, or certainly felt, yeah, I was successful and I felt secure in what I was doing before. And so maybe this is the advantage, going back to your earlier question, of being 20 and starting a company, is when I was 20, I wasn't thinking much about anything.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Founders Ascent. It's BJ here with Gavin again, and we're joined by our special guest, Sean Craig. Sean is the co-founder and managing director of the Impact Society. He's worked in a lot of different careers across a lot of different both places and also companies, and is now building sort of his own thing, co-founding the Impact Society, which we'll delve deep into. But we'll go back and start with sort of, Sean, where's all this coming from? What's your background? How has that led you to start the Impact Society?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you both. So yeah, it's a good point. Like, I've done lots of different things over my career. So I started out as an environmental engineer in my undergraduate, and I did some very cool things, like working up in the Gulf of Carpentaria in Northern Australia, like quite literally at times dodging crocodiles and chasing whales and turtles and tracking them, which was very cool work out on boats and ships and there in the Barrier Reef. And I really enjoyed it, very adventurous, but I didn't find the perhaps the intellectual stimulation, or my type of intellectual stimulation there. So it's no judgment on that work, but it just, as fun as it was, I wanted to do something different. I started doing a master's in finance and economics. I did that. I finished that. I moved into commercial management, and I found that challenging. Like, it was intellectually very stimulating for me, and I did that for a few years. And then I moved from Queensland, which is on the east coast of Australia, to Western Australia, and started a job at a place called Fremantle Ports, which is the main port authority on the west coast of Australia. And that was in commercial management. But then that was my first management role. So I started managing and leading people. And to be honest, because I think this will be relevant for the conversation we have later, I was promoted into a management role, I think it's fair to say, because I was good at what I did before, because people could rely on me for what I did before and they trusted me, not because someone actually checked and tested and confidently knew that I was suited to management or leadership. Now, whether or not I was suited to it at that point, it turns out I was really interested in it and I loved it and I learned a lot and I certainly got better at it. And more than just being reasonably good at it, by other people's report, more importantly, I learned that I loved it. And so then I went through a series of management roles at Fremantle Ports, and I was an executive general manager for a long time. I was the CEO for 6 months, and then after that, I was the interim CEO. So, and then after that, once they appointed a new CEO, I decided to leave the organisation, because what I'd always wanted to do, like as long as I can remember, from being a teenager, maybe even younger, I wanted to start my own company and do my own thing. And certainly one of the things I learned in that 6 months of doing the CEO role is, like, I loved it. Like, I really, really loved it. It was the best 6 months of my corporate career. And why did I love it? I loved it. To be honest, I love the autonomy of the role. I love, not like, there's a board that I reported to, but they're obviously, they're not hands-on. They're not involved in day-to-day management. They're involved in a really good and helpful and supportive way at a high and strategic level. So I love that autonomy. And then it's just the ultimate expression in that organization anyway, it's the ultimate expression of management and leadership. And that just confirmed for me, one, that I wanted to run my own company, but two, what I learned is, I don't, like most people, I don't just need intellectual stimulation. I don't just need to get paid. Like that's the reality of life for 99% of us. But I need to do something purposeful and that really makes a difference to me. And so management and leadership that was the missing piece for me, the sense of purpose I found around it compared to my earlier jobs, which were stimulating, they're rewarding. I was reasonably good at them, and I was well paid for them. What was missing was a sense of purpose, and it just turns out for me, I love management and leadership. I love trying to get better at it. I love trying to help other managers in particular. Once I became a manager of managers, I love trying to help other people create an amazing environment for their team, where their team feels fulfilled, stimulated, all the things I mentioned about myself, stimulated, fulfilled, valued, and impactful, but also that they're making a difference, that they're actually producing a positive impact for the within the organisation or for the organisation to their stakeholders, whether those stakeholders are their customers, whether they're in for a not-for-profit or a government agency, for their benefactors, for society, but also for other stakeholders, which society is traditionally focused on more around shareholders, for example. So then I quit, and then I started Impact Society with a colleague of mine, so a guy, Joel Bailey. He and I started working together about 10 years ago, and he came and worked in my team. And we just discovered a great meeting of the minds around, we share values, we share an interest in management and leadership, we share an interest in entrepreneurialism, and we got along really well. We had a lot of fun. I had more fun with him and a few other people that we worked with than I've ever had in my life, certainly in a work context. And I just thought, I'd met my my person in an entrepreneurial sense, and we'd always want to do it, and now we've got the opportunity. And yeah, it's been unreal. So yeah, and then we started Impact Society last year, and it's still early days, but yeah. So that's the journey to Impact Society.
So much to unpack there.
Sure, go for it.
I kind of want to start with, so you mentioned how being a teenager, you always wanted to start your own company, but then you proceed to spend like 20 years in like going to college and working for a corporation, all this other stuff, where like right now, social media and everything else is just like, drop out of college, you don't need college, you don't need high school, just go do your own thing and make it happen. Do you sort of have an opinion on that, where working a normal job is significantly better for learning the skills you need as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, maybe I could just talk briefly about why I followed that path despite having that view before university of wanting to be an entrepreneur. So for me, in the same way that, say, in America, you'd finish middle school and it's just a given that you go to high school afterwards. For me, the context in which I was brought up with my parents, but also my school, it was a given that once I finished high school, I'd go to university. And so I didn't really question that. And I certainly don't regret it now either. Like, university was a really important experience for me. So as soon as I finished high school, I didn't even think about what I'd do next, other than, well, what am I going to study? And then I went to university for 5 years and I studied. And then everyone at university, generally speaking, certainly at that time, and certainly maybe in Australia, even more so than the US, people are like, well, now you go and get a job, a good job with a company. So I just did that. I thought, well, I've been to university for 5 years, I might as well work. And so I went and did that. And I guess I was surprised how much I liked it. I actually really enjoyed working in a corporate environment. And I was, through a combination of good luck and hard work, I kept being given more and more responsibility in my roles, and really interesting and exciting opportunities. So I kept taking them. I always knew in the back of my mind that it was a stepping stone to starting my own thing. I never would have guessed that it was a 20-year stepping stone, which, when I started, I was only 22, 23 years old. So like 20 years was like my entire life repeated again. To your question of, do I have an opinion on whether that's a good way to go or not? I don't know. I don't have a strong view on whether it's a good way to go or not, but I think it's probably underrated, in as much as I think starting companies, and remembering I'm at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, so I'm learning this as I go. It's not that, I'm down the track and I know this for a fact. These are my beliefs and what I've learned through other people and observations. I think it's often glorified in podcasts, in books, in society, the idea of starting a company when you're a teenager or in a college dorm or something like that. That's the romantic view of it. And obviously that works very fantastically well for a handful of people that we learn about through the media. I think the advantages of working first is you develop a lot of in my case, managerial leadership and life skills and just human relational skills through the workplace that now I feel much better equipped to start a company than I possibly could have 20 years. Now, 20 years ago, if I'd started a company 20 years ago, do I think I would have worked it out? Yeah, I'm sure I would have worked it out. But I think, I mean, let's see, time will tell. I'd like to think I would make far fewer not no mistakes, but far fewer mistakes now than I would have then. But the other thing that's really important is, so actually 10 years ago, the bit I skipped over is I took a year out of the corporate world and I moved to the US for a year. And my objective during that year was to do something entrepreneurial. And I worked on a couple of different projects to see what it was. Now, I found ideas that I believe, and even in hindsight, I believe could have made money and had good demand for them. I think I would have been reasonably well equipped to do those things, but I didn't have any great sense of purpose in them. And so I think part of the reason why, like, I didn't really stick with that, I ended up going back to the corporate environment a year later largely because I missed it, and I went back to Fremantle Ports, in fact. Is because I didn't feel any great sense of purpose in what I was doing, so I didn't feel an attachment to it. So to go back to your question, I think an advantage of working for 20 years, particularly if you do a bunch of different things, as I have and many people do, you learn a lot of different skills, but you actually learn a lot about yourself. And importantly, I think you learn about what uniquely floats your boat, like what uniquely makes you tick, where you get your sense of satisfaction, of gratitude, of purpose from. And you're probably familiar with the Ikigai concept, but if the idea of that is that to find deep fulfillment in our work, we need to find something that we can get paid for, that we're good at, that society needs, and where we find a sense of purpose. And as a 20-year-old, I couldn't have found those things because I didn't know enough about the world. I didn't know enough about myself to be able to do that. So I'm sure, like, there's a good chance I would have made money. I'm sure there's a good chance, or maybe not, but I think there's a chance I would have made money. I think there's a chance I would have eventually developed the skills to be good at it. But, you know, the things I would have come up with as a 20-year-old, I don't know that they would have been very important to the world, even if I could get paid for it. And I don't know that they would have been felt deeply purposeful for me. So yeah, there's some thoughts on the question. I don't have a clear view. It's probably for individual. You know, you meet some amazing 18-year-olds, particularly these days, and like they know what makes a difference in the world. They have a clear sense that I didn't of, you know, what makes them feel, what fills their cup, so to speak. That wasn't me.
I'm interested though too in hearing more about Impact Society. From my understanding, it seems like you guys are trying to create some sort of community here and help managers become successful leaders. And so you guys right now are writing a lot of articles and you guys both have experience with consulting. And so how are you guys going about creating that community, and how are you guys going to add value and actually measure that value? So what is all that going to look like?
Yeah. So I think we've got so many, I was about to say young people, but people, young or old, who are in management roles, who aspire to be in management roles, and they've got so much capability to be great leaders. I think the problem that we've got in society generally at the moment is it's quite hard actually to know how to transition from being thrust into a management role to being a great leader, because there's a lot of material available, but it's either like I went and studied, it took me 3 years to finish it, an MBA, and you can learn it that way, but that's a big effort. And to be honest, I enjoyed it. It actually didn't make a particularly strong difference to my leadership ability. You've got stuffy, old worldly stuff that's available, like a lot of management materials, you know, stuck in the past. It's not packaged and delivered in a way that appeals and talks to particularly younger generations, but whatever age you are, more progressive people. And so I think the answer for that, for the question we've been asking ourselves, is how do we solve that problem? How do we unlock the potential of all those managers and aspiring managers around the world to make a big difference within their teams, but also for the impact that their teams make within their organisation, or their organisations make within their communities, within the world, however big their community might be. So the answer for us is to develop, you're right, like one is about developing a sense of community of like-minded aspiring and established leaders around the world, but it's also about creating a set of practical, straightforward, accessible, stylish too, like easy to use tools, products, content. So we're working on a book at the moment, and the plan is that we would publish and develop a whole range of books, but also curate like other materials from around the world and around the web for people, and then an online management systems and tools as well. So basically, the idea is that it would be like a management operating system. So if one of us, back in time for me, and perhaps in the future for you, you get put into a management role in an organisation, you can sign up for and subscribe to our management operating system, and you'd have access to a straightforward, easy to use set of tools that just guide you on, hey, here's the 20% of things that you can do as a manager, that if you just get these basic things right, you're 80% of the way there, not just to being a good manager, but to being a great leader. So there's some of the things. We haven't launched any of those things yet, but there's some of the things that we're working on. So in terms of developing a community, at the moment, we're doing that through sharing our thinking online. So we're very active. We post every day on LinkedIn. We post blog articles on our website, and wanting to do things like this, like be on podcasts and talk to people and listen to people about their ideas. So, like, we're big believers in giving away a lot of value, because there is a true purpose to what we're doing, which is to actually make it. It's first and foremost important of us to make a difference, but for it to be sustainable for us, we also need to make some money at some point to sustain ourselves. But yeah, we're big believers in giving away a lot of value in our thinking, because we just like to be helpful. We also think that's a smart business development strategy, and because we're learning too. Like, we don't see ourselves, like, we do have expertise in management and leadership, but we're far from knowing everything. And I learn stuff every day. I'll learn stuff through this podcast, and just by giving stuff away, that helps create a conversation and some reciprocity too.
That's phenomenal. Yeah. Are you a big fan of fantasy by any chance? Like fantasy books?
Fantasy?
Yeah, just like fantasy, the genre.
Oh, no, I'm not
Yeah.
actually. No.
So
So
this kind of.
I wouldn't say, like, the truth is I've just never read any. So
Oh
I'm
wow.
not drawn to them. I've never read any. Well, but I'm very curious about why you asked that question.
Yeah. So in a number of this isn't so common, but in a number of fantasy books, there's like the leader of a particular community might magically transfer all the past leaders' knowledge into that person, and it, like, continues on. And so, like,
Okay.
when they're vying for control, it's not just the control but the knowledge of past leaders. What you were talking about with all these management tools and all the books and articles and everything you're producing, it just reminded me of that. This is probably just me and me being a massive
No,
nerd,
I love it.
but it reminded me of something like that, where the knowledge of past leaders gets infused into you when you accept a new role.
Well, I mean, so no, I didn't know about that, but now I'm curious, and maybe I should check out some fantasy ones, and maybe you can give me a starting point for something like that. But I think, like, I heard this great quote. I think it was by Ryan Holiday, the guy who writes on Stoicism.
Oh yeah.
He was saying in a podcast I listened to not so long ago, perhaps on Tim Ferriss or Diary of a CEO or something like that. I'll butcher it, but what he said was something about if we don't read, we can only live one life, but by reading, we can live many lives over. And I think whether it's through reading or education, like, to your exact point, that's a way for us to do the hard yards for all the new managers. Say, hey, we've tested, like, in real life, day-to-day management, a whole bunch of things, and we've worked out a whole bunch of things that don't work. But in that process, let us try and help you on that journey by showing you, here's some just reliable ways of going about being an effective manager and leader. Like, here's the few things that if you're just going to do these are a really good way to start. And then, what excites me is the thought of young, or it's not necessarily about being young, but people who are early in the stage of their management careers, they do that as a base, and then they start building on top of that what works for them in their particular context. But also too, they might work out some generally reliable ways of being a great leader too. And by us building a community, they can share that back with us. And that's an opportunity for us to share that around. So I think that's absolutely like a big part of what we're trying to do is to capture, the common wisdom or the common sense of management and leadership that isn't common practice generally in society. And it's certainly not obvious to many people when they start management roles that we can be facilitate that process. So Brene Brown, who you're probably familiar with, talks a lot about being a fellow person on the journey, not being the map maker. And certainly that's how I see it is, yes, we do have some expertise and a lot of experience that we can contribute, but we're also just see ourselves as being guides, shoulder to shoulder on the journey with up and coming and established managers and leaders, not trying to pretend that we're the all-seeing, all-knowing divine beings of management and leadership, because we're not.
Yeah, I've heard knowledge described as a bunch of borrowed ideas that you pick up along your journey from other people. And I forgot exactly where I heard it from, but I definitely agree with that. And it kind of reminded me of what you were talking about with Ryan Holiday and how he was saying that. And so I think it was last year, BJ, and a guy that we mutually know was looking to read one of the books that we had read, Think and Grow Rich. And BJ was like, the cool part about reading is you get to pick up a book that somebody dedicated their entire life to creating, and you get to read that thing in the span of a week and sort of get an understanding of what somebody dedicated their entire life to. And that's one of the reasons why I love reading so much, because you get to spend a week or more, depending on how long it takes you to kind of digest that information and sort of understand, not to the degree that they understand it, but to a good enough extent to where you could sort of live your life by it, the information that somebody dedicated their entire life to. And so I think a lot of people can pick that up, especially from nonfiction books. I'm trying to read more fiction books. I'm reading a fiction book right now, and not my favorite, but I'm definitely trying. There's a lot to learn from fiction books. We read The Alchemist, and I think that's a great one if you've heard of it, Sean. But
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
yeah, that's a good one too. But it seems like that's what you guys are trying to do here at Impact Society from what I've seen so far, with that just sharing knowledge through these articles that you guys are writing. And so are you guys planning on creating some sort of community to sort of add to that written element? Or are you guys going to make some sort of we've seen discords in which you have to pay to get into the Discord or something like that? Or what are you guys planning on doing in the future, if you have plans to sort of add another element to that written aspect of things?
Yeah, so in order for us to be able to sustain the value we add to people, but also to add greater value, we'll be launching very soon our first paid product, which will be a strategic planning toolkit. So one of the fundamental roles of a leader is to decide on and set a clear direction for their organization or team. And that's something that, in my observation, everybody does a different way. And most of those ways, in my judgment, are overcomplicated, unnecessarily overcomplicated, but overcomplicated to the point that they actually undermine their effectiveness. So I used to work with a personal trainer a few years ago, and she told me that the best workout program is the one that you stick to. And so I think that's true of so many things. That was such an insight for me. While I was dying from doing push-ups or something like that, I nevertheless retained the insight that, whether it's a workout program, whether it's trying to form new habits, but in this case, whether you're trying to develop a new strategy for your team, for your podcast, for your organization, for your community group, for a government as a whole, if you're a political leader, the best strategy, the best direction is the one that people can align with, they can understand, align themselves with, and stick to. I think there's a sophistication bias that seems to be built into all of us, that if it seems too simple, we're like, oh, we need to complicate it more until I feel satisfied with it. But once it gets too complicated. So we've got a toolkit that's almost finished, which will help any team leader, any CEO, any startup founder, any any leader develop a straightforward, excellent, not just good enough, but excellent strategic plan in a day through a workshop. So there's some lead up work. Then it'll hold their hand and provide them all the facilitation tools. So templates, agendas, emails to send to their team and to their organisation as a whole, so that within the space of a few weeks, they can develop an excellent strategic plan for their organisation or their team, and then get on with implementing it. So there's a quote by somebody who, I think it was Jack Welch from GE. He said, strategy is something like strategy is fundamentally about picking a direction, then executing like hell in that direction. And so we think that's true. It's best just to have a good plan and then to execute it vigorously. And if you discover down the track a reason to adjust it, then adjust it, rather than wait, a year to develop a perfect plan and then get on with it. So that's our first tool. And then to come up a level, to answer your question more completely, we want to develop a bunch of physical and online tools. So, for example, we're working on a personal planner, like essentially a journal or a diary is not the right word, but something that looks like that, a physical product for managers and leaders. It'll be tailored and customized to help leaders on a quarterly and weekly, daily basis, review and plan the work of them individually and their team as a whole. And all these things will connect. So if you've got a strategic plan that you've done through the Impact Society process, when you get the planner, it'll show you, okay, here's the quarterly process, here's how that integrates through it. And again, everything we want to do, we want it to be easy to use, we want it to be effective, we want it to be stylish. I think we all, Apple's a good case that proves that we all like using things that look and feel good to use. And it's not just the case that that's rare in business. It never happens that you get something in business that's nice and feels good to you. So we want to do that as well. So not at the expense of being effective, but in addition to being effective. Then down the track, certainly what I see us developing is some online tools and systems. So tools and systems for setting and tracking your organisation or your team's annual and quarterly goals. We talk a lot about objectives and key results, OKRs, which have been popularized particularly in America in management through some of the big tech companies. And so we want to help people have a tool for tracking their team and progress against goals on a weekly basis, on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis. And again, it would integrate with our strategic plan. It would integrate with our planning products. We're working on an engagement framework. So employee engagement is a topic that's really important and very topical in organizations around the world. So in a study in Harvard Business Review some years ago, and this was actually an important part of my journey to coming on board with this stuff, is I read this article maybe 8 years ago in Harvard Business Review, and their research showed that highly engaged people, so that's people, engagement's one of the things that I think is a little bit hard sometimes to explain, but you know it when you feel it. So we're engaged at work when we feel passionate, when we can work really hard, we can feel like we can work, somewhat forever, and we work really hard, and we might even work long hours, and we come home, we might be physically tired from it, but we don't feel exhausted or burnt out because we're doing something we love. It's, to me, when we talk about that ikigai concept, it's about, in an organizational way, at an enterprise level, steering the individuals and the teams into their own ikigai space, where they feel they're doing purposeful work, they feel like they're valued within the organization, that they're good at it, and that they're being rewarded appropriately for it. So we're working on an engagement framework. That Harvard Business Review study showed that highly engaged people are 3 times as productive as people who are just satisfied at work. So, twice as productive as people who are just satisfied at work. So there's none of, if you ask someone, how are you feeling at work? They go, oh yeah, no, I'm satisfied with it. You go, okay, well, that's not bad. But if you can engage people, they're going to be twice as productive. So that's really good for the organization. It's really good for the individual, because when we go home feeling valued and that we're doing a good job in our work, we're better partners, we're better friends, we're better parents, we're better community members. And I get really excited thinking about, well, I don't know what the population of Dallas is where you guys are, but I imagine it's several million people. Imagine millions of people in one city going home on a Friday afternoon feeling 10% better about themselves because or 20% or twice as good about themselves. I just think about, I shared this with a friend recently. I said, they said they're in New York, and they're saying, I think even the subway would just be a friendlier place to be in peak hour, like if everyone felt better about themselves at work. And I think that's true. And then you go home and you have a great weekend with your family, with your friends, with your community, which is really good for society. But then you roll into Monday, like in a Monday to Friday world, you roll into Monday, and there's just a beautiful positive feedback loop there. So finding a way to engage people, because there's research that was published or reported in the Financial Times last year that 80% of the world's workers are actually disengaged. They are not engaged with their work at the moment. And some Gallup research showed that it might be even closer to 90%. So I just go, there's the society benefits of people feeling better about themselves and better about work. But imagine if you doubled or tripled the world's productivity. Imagine the impact that that governments and not-for-profits, that businesses, that all around the world could have on really big things that are important to society. We're facing some huge issues in society, so we need all hands on deck. We can't afford to have organisations where 80% of people aren't engaged, because we're never going to solve some of the big challenges and tackle the exciting opportunities that are facing all of us. So yeah, you can possibly hear how excited I get about this stuff. But
Yeah.
I just think it's not an easy thing. Well, I don't think it's as complicated as everyone thinks it is to solve, in terms of it's actually not that hard. Is my experience, to be a pretty good manager. What is hard is to find the pathway to do it. It's pretty straightforward once someone shows you how to do it, once you work it out. There's a lot of common sense. It's not common practice.
That's so much there. Once again, every time you talk, I get like 5 other questions that pop up.
That's okay. I
But
got plenty of time.
so you have this massive vision, which I love. The picturing a million people happier, twice as happy on the subway and all this other stuff is phenomenal to me. But there's so much, and then you outlined, half a dozen different sort of products you guys are working on. How do you determine those first steps? Because there's this
Yeah.
aspect of what's easy versus hard for you to do, and then there's the other axis of what would be most impactful to people versus what do they not really care about. And so how are you determining what to do?
So we've been working on a blueprint, essentially, of a management operator or a leadership operating system. So there's around we're yet to finalize it, but at the moment in our mind and our sort of our work that we've documented between ourselves, there's about 6 to 8 elements in there. So I won't go through all of them, but I've covered a couple of them. One is set a clear direction. Another one is align your team with it. Another one is engage your team, so that what we want is, you want a clear direction, you want everyone pointing in that direction, and then you want everyone driving as hard as possible in a sustainable way in that direction. And then there's other elements that were coming in there. So for each of those elements, we want to develop a series of products or tools or systems or content. So the products could be books, they could be training programs eventually. It will be cultivating a global community of like-minded people where people can come together and share ideas. Now, how do we decide what's the filter that we use? I think for us, a value of Joel and I is the 80-20 rule. So we want to do our best and be disciplined not to overcomplicate things for people, because that's the opposite of what we're about. So looking to define the 20% of tools, systems, content, training, products, merchandise that will help people just nail 80% of it, pretty straightforward. then once we've built out that system, or fairly soon, like, so it will take us time to build that out. And how I think we'll do it is we'll sell individual products, but then we'll sell a membership subscription, so that members of Impact Society will have access to all of our tools, or certainly all of our online tools and products. It will include some of our physical products. It will certainly include access to subscriber-only events that we want to hold eventually around the world. And in terms of, you mentioned earlier about Discord and having some subscriber-only content, it might include some membership-only thinking. So I think for me, and I think for us, we want to keep, for the reasons I said earlier, we want to keep making available a lot of our thinking that we collect and that originates with us, with as many people as possible. I think that's smart for our business in terms of building a following, but I think it's also just the right thing to do for the world as a whole. But it might be that we look at things like, maybe we provide early access to some of that and later access to everyone else, or some combination of that. We haven't thought that through. And then eventually, I'd really like to see, or my vision is that we'd start moving into physical and retail places around the world. So at the moment, we're most focused on the US, because I think, not exclusively, but I think the US simply because it's such a big market. But also too, I think there's a lot of organizations in the US that actually really get and subscribe to this modern view of leadership, that it's not people or profit, it's actually both. Like, it's most important over the long term. For an organization to be highly successful and highly impactful, it has to be looking after its people well. For it to look after its people well over the long term, it has to be doing well as a business. So, and I think there's organizations all around the world that get that. There's some societies that get it more than others, and there's some markets that are bigger than others. So that's a bit of why we're saying US. And about developing a retail or a physical presence, for us, that is so that it's about rounding out our presence, but also building credibility from a business point of view. So rounding out our presence, like online content doesn't work for everyone. But also too, it's about rounding out a series of integrated, I guess, online and physical touch points where aspiring new and established managers are getting all the support and tools that they need to be great leaders in their space.
Yeah. And so for those 6 to 8 domains, do you think the goal is to just have like one product out for each of them and then start building? Or do you think focus on one domain, build that out, and then go to the next?
I think that's a really good question, and it's one that I don't think we've arrived at a final answer on. But
Yeah.
I think in the first instance, there's just a reality of starting a business that we probably can't afford to wait until we do all 8 in order to start sort of commercializing it. We will start with one domain and one product, and then we'll start building out around there. I think, it's an interesting question, and like I say, it's not one we have a clear answer on. I think for me, my view is we'd want to get a minimum viable product or product set in each of those domains or elements, and then not wait till then to start charging it. We'll start charging a subscription for people who want to be members much sooner than that. But in the same way, like, think what you will of Amazon, but in the same way that Prime membership, like their business model, which is compelling based on how well they do, is they just keep stuffing more and more and more and more value into that membership. And we're yet to test that business model, so I'm only speculating, but that appeals to me as an idea. Like, I like the idea of being generous in the value that we provide people. I think that in the long term, that's smart for us as a business, but I think it's just aligned with our purpose and the difference we're trying to make in the world.
Yeah, because I think as much as it's specific to your 6 to 8 domains and what you're doing here, I think that's an important question for any company to answer is, do we focus on building this like flagship reputation, or do we provide value across the board where that's like increasing the surface area for people to access us, where if you have any problem, we can solve it, versus being really, really good at just solving one problem?
Well, I think it's a question of scale and zooming in and out, because we want to be really good in the domain of management and leadership. But to your very point, if you zoom in a bit more, like to the next level, then suddenly you see 6 or 8. I might call them subdomains within the domain of management and leadership. So no, like I think for us is we want to work towards building out a complete and integrated management operating system or leadership operating system for people. And then also too, like one of my favorite expressions is momentum, not perfection. And I think for us, like that's something that Joel and I share. I thought that he was the one who first said that to me, and he reckons that I'm the one who first said that to him. But I think what we agree is neither of us made it up. But it's a great expression that I haven't stopped saying for like 8 years, to the point of like people in my team, in a very loving and charming and playful way, have often made fun of me for saying that. But I say it because I think it's so true, like so often. And if I'm totally honest, I'm caught up in it now with our first product, right? I'm the very thing that I preach about. I'm making that mistake myself right now with our first product of prioritizing perfection over momentum. Because I think if I'm truly honest with myself and with you, like if when you leave a corporate career, and I wasn't perfect, but like it was going well for me and I enjoyed it, and people seemed to keep offering me new roles, so they obviously thought there was something good in what I was doing. You, it feels great, like to feel a sense of purpose, to feel valued by the people around you, and then to quit a corporate career. Like I said this to someone once. They said, "Oh, can I just double check? So you loved your job, people valued you and supported you. You had no job security issues. I didn't. And in my words, you got overpaid for what you did. All right." I'm like, and they're like, "So you're quitting that for nothing, like for nothing certain?" I'm like, "Yeah, like, that's what I want to do." And it is scary, right? Like, and so I have to say that when I've been wondering why I've struggled a bit to finish our first product, and I think it just comes down to there's a little bit of fear there, going, "Oh, like I was successful, or certainly felt, yeah, I was successful, and I felt secure in what I was doing before." And so maybe this is the advantage, going back to your earlier question, of being 20 and starting a company, is when I was 20, I wasn't thinking much about anything. I certainly wasn't overthinking stuff. Like I should have and needed to think more about things and more deeply about the world, but I wasn't. An advantage of that is you probably don't second guess yourself so much. You probably don't tie so much, you know, uh, you don't tie your own sense of well-being and success to the particular outcome of anything, right? You're just like, "Oh, well, I'm 20 and I'm young, and I'm talking about me, not other 20-year-olds. I was a bit of an idiot." So, like, you just do things and you start it and you don't think about it. And yeah, so one problem of being older is start to think more about things. And sorry, I'm jumping around a bit on your questions, but
Yeah.
I think the challenge might be when you're 40. I don't have a family and I don't have any great responsibilities in life, like financial responsibilities or family responsibilities or anything like that. So I can afford, I'm very grateful to be in a position where I can afford to take a risk in those regards on it. But that's perhaps the challenge, is as you get older with starting a business, I think for many other people, is the reality is the older you get on average, it's not always true, and it's not true for everyone, you start to accumulate more responsibilities in life. You might have kids, you might have a big mortgage, you might have a lifestyle that you've become attached to. And to go back in the extreme to being, eating ramen, or as we call them, 2-minute noodles every night, you and to not sleep much. So as you get older, like you start to think, "Oh, I really value sleep actually." It's probably a bit scary to take that leap. So going back to where it was difficult for me to decide to leave, and it was scary. Now I haven't looked back since, and I feel like it's one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. But yeah, like momentum, not perfection. So I'm off on a real tangent here, but the momentum. Let me help you by bringing us back on track. The momentum, not perfection. I think for us, and I think this might generally be true, but yet to be proven, it's better. Everybody talks about minimum viable product. In my mind, minimal viable product probably means doing a pretty good job of most things. And for us, we're defining our level of expertise and our interests and our superpowers that we're going to develop in management and leadership. and that means rounding out or building out a minimal viable product portfolio. We're not going to wait for the whole portfolio to be complete to start commercializing it, but in the first instance, working to that, getting a pretty good rounded out system, and then we'll perfect it in time based on feedback, based on more investment.
It's so interesting that you say you got off track, except this is kind of where we've been wanting to bring the discussion of both the podcast as a whole, but also with you, is sort of this fear of failure holding people back, where like you working on your first product, like you're trying to make it perfect, you're trying to make it where people will be really impressed by it, and I'm sure they will be. It sounds fantastic, but you're still, sort of waiting to launch it. And like I think that's across the board. I think that's just about everyone all the time, whether you want to start a podcast or do stuff on social media or start a company, or just pursue your passion. You don't want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be an artist, whatever you want. Like I think, and it's also interesting that you think it's harder to do it now, leaving the corporate space. Because from my perspective, I'm like, well, I have my parents that I don't want to disappoint, and I have all my peers and all these people around you, and then there's that pretty girl in my class, and I don't want to disappoint her, and all this other stuff, right? Where like the everyone else is, oh, I just got this big internship at Facebook or whatever else, right? Where you look at everyone else and they're making these big leaps and doing all this crazy stuff. And so I thought, oh, it's going to be so much easier to, get some successes under my belt, and then I'll have the permission to do whatever I want. But it seems like it's always hard.
So I'm so glad you shared. Thank you for sharing that with me, because it's a great reminder, actually, of something that I believe to be true. I think is a universal truth. So I wrote not so long ago about this, that everybody's winging it. Like, I don't know if you say winging it in American English, but everybody's just winging it. Everyone's doing their best. And thank you for reminding me that whether you're 20 or in my case 43, or I'm not sure how old you are, but whether you're closer to 20 or in my case 43 or 60, the truth is nobody really knows. And this is something I learned actually through the corporate world and just experience and learning. Actually, nobody's got it worked out. I think there's some people who have largely got it worked out, but they've stayed in a very tight and specific. They've gone deep and narrow in life, in a domain for work. I think there's another bunch of people who would have you believe that they've got it worked out. I don't think that's true. Like, it might be the case that they're, in some cases, delusional. Like, they're actually genuinely kidding themselves. Like, and I don't think they have, right? If they're not that deep and narrow people, I'm trying to be respectful of that. But management and leadership, and I think more and more in life is, it's about trying to just be generally good at working out how to navigate life and new situations and things that you've not navigated before. I think what explains the difference between people, between how, in a sense, confident that they might come across, is in many cases it's just people. It's invulnerability. It's an unwillingness to be open and honest and vulnerable with one another. Like, even just you then, like saying, you said a few things, but saying, oh, like, I don't want to disappoint my parents. I've got this pretty girl in my class. I'm 43. Like, I still don't want to disappoint my parents. I'm not worried about that because I'm very grateful. My parents, I feel infinitely supported by them. But I'm still 43. I still have pretty girls I want to impress, and I still have, I'm still subject to those things. But maybe the difference between me when I'm 43 and me when I was 20, which I really admire that you're able to do this at your age, I probably wasn't prepared to admit it 20 years ago. Whereas now, like, I'm not perfect, but like, I don't find it too hard to be candid about the things that scare me and about the ways in which I'm perfectly human, and sort of, again, like, prioritize perfection over momentum, even though I preach the opposite and believe the opposite. But yeah, I don't know. Like, it's a good point. Like, everyone's winging it. I think the difference between, to admit that you don't know what you're doing is actually, obviously, it's a form of vulnerability. I think it's also, paradoxically, the mistake many people in life generally, but managers and leaders in particular, make, is not admitting it. Because when you admit it, I think two things happen. Like, one, vulnerability creates connection. So you'll find your team, your peers, your boss, wherever you sit in the organization, are only drawn closer to you. They see you as the human that you are, because we're all human. But also, too, you're probably going to get more help, because people go, oh shit, sorry for swearing in the podcast, but they go, oh, what do you know? Like, oh yeah, of course. Like, BJ, thanks for telling me. Like, I just want to help you, like, sort of thing. And most people, most of the time, will just want to help one another. So I think a core part of being a successful leader is actually being candid, because nobody's perfect. Like, of course you don't know everything that you're doing. Like, of course you don't, that sort of thing. Just by being open about that, it creates a psychologically safe space for your team, because they go, oh, okay. It's okay for me to admit the universal truth that I don't know everything. It's okay to do that. It's safe to do that. And also, too, like, oh, he or she or they, like my manager, oh, I see them as more of a human now, and I just feel a bit more drawn and connected with them. And the third thing might be, well, I can help them, actually.